There's a question nobody ever asks about history. You always ask the same things. How many wars were there? How many kings? How many people died? When did which empire fall? What you never ask is this: what about love? How did you meet someone in the Middle Ages? How did you tell them you liked them? How did you know if they felt the same way? No phone, no apps, no bars, none of what you use today to find someone. That's the question today, and the answer is more complicated, more interesting, and in some ways more honest than anything we have now. Let's start with the most important thing. The thing nobody tells you when they talk about love in the Middle Ages. Love and marriage had nothing to do with each other. Today that sounds strange. Today, marriage is the end of a love story. You meet someone, you feel something, you build a relationship, and if everything goes well, at some point you decide you want to be together forever. Love comes first, marriage comes after. In the Middle Ages, it was exactly the other way around. Marriage was a contract, an agreement between families, a political, economic, social instrument. The bride's father and the future husband negotiated. They talked about land, property, alliances, what each family gained from the union. The bride was informed once the decision had already been made. Her consent was in practice a formality. Love, if it appeared, came after, or it didn't come at all. And in either case, life went on exactly the same. So if marriage had nothing to do with love, where was love? Somewhere else. In a parallel space with its own rules, its own language, its own codes. A system so elaborate it had a name. Courtly love, and courtly love is the closest thing to a dating app that existed in the Middle Ages. Except instead of algorithms, there were troubadours. And instead of photos, there were tournaments. Here's how it worked. You were a young man at a medieval court. A knight, a minor noble, someone with some status, but not enough to be the first choice of any important family. And there was a woman, a lady of the court, probably already married, with a husband she didn't choose and who didn't choose her. A woman who lived in the same social space as you, but who the rules of the time made it impossible to approach directly. What did you do? First, you looked. That was the official first step of the process. The lover looked, observed, studied the lady from a distance. This state had a name, Fenidor, the silent admirer, the one who hasn't said anything yet, but already feels everything. And the important thing here is that this wasn't seen as ridiculous or pathetic. It was the first step of the process. It was the beginning of the game. Then came the second step. You'd already decided you were going to do something. You approached, usually through an intermediary, because direct contact was complicated, and you let the lady know you existed, that you'd noticed her, that you intended to court her. The lady could ignore you, could reject you, could leave you in that state of uncertainty for months, because within courtly love, the woman had real power that she had in no other aspect of her life. She was the one who decided whether the courtship moved forward or stayed where it was. If she decided to accept, she let you know in a way that was never direct, a smile at the right moment, a gaze held 1 second longer than normal, a small object given in a moment when nobody else was watching. A handkerchief, a piece of jewelry, a lock of hair. Does any of this sound familiar? It's exactly what someone does when they like a story at 2 in the morning. The signal, the gesture that says there's interest without saying it in words. The problem was that in the Middle Ages that gesture took weeks to arrive, or months. There was no way to know if the lady had seen your signal or simply ignored it. No read receipts, no scene at 2:32 p.m. You sent the signal and then you waited, with no indicator of what was happening on the other side. That uncertainty wasn't a flaw in the system. It was the point. Courtly love was built on tension, the desire that doesn't resolve immediately, the wait that gives value to what finally arrives. Now let me tell you what happened in the villages, because most people in the Middle Ages didn't live in courts. In the medieval village, meeting someone was at the same time simpler and more limited. Simple because everyone saw everyone all the time. The village was small. Families had known each other for generations. Opportunities to interact existed every day at the market, at church, in communal tasks. Limited because the range of available people was exactly what it was. If your village had 200 people and half were men, and of the rest, some were too young or too old or too closely related. The actual margin of choice was extremely narrow. The church was the social center of everything, not just the religious space. Sunday was the day people saw each other, talked, observed. The masses were long, and the squares in front of churches were where village life happened before and after. It was the only place where you could regularly see someone from another family without it seeming intentional. Fairs and markets were the other big moments. People from different villages in the same space at the same time. For many people in the Middle Ages, the fair at the nearest town was the most important social event of the year. The possibility of seeing new faces, of running into someone you didn't know from your whole life. And then there were the religious festivals, and here comes something that official history doesn't usually tell you. Some medieval religious festivals were in practice the context where social norms relaxed in a pretty significant way. Carnivals, certain seasonal celebrations that mixed the Christian calendar with much older traditions. In those moments, things that normally weren't allowed happened with a permissiveness that at any other time would have been unthinkable, dancing between people who weren't family. Physical contact, mixing between genders. It was the moment of the year where courtship could happen more directly, where a look could become a conversation without anyone raising too much of an eyebrow. Now let me tell you the part that least people know about. There existed in the Middle Ages, more common in the British Isles and Northern Europe, an institution called hand fasting. It worked like this. A couple joined hands, pronounced vows of union, and was considered married, without a priest necessarily, without a church, without papers. The act of joining hands and saying the words was enough for the union to be socially valid. But there was a variation that was even more interesting. The trial hand fasting, a union that lasted a year and a day. At the end of that period, the couple decided whether they wanted to convert the union into something permanent or whether they preferred to dissolve it with no legal consequences for either of them. A trial relationship with an expiration date of 1 year. How many conversations have you had about whether marriage should be renewable? How many articles have you read about whether committing forever makes sense in today's world? How many people do you know who say that the idea of eternal marriage is an outdated concept that doesn't work? Someone in the Middle Ages had already reached that conclusion, and they had institutionalized it. There's one more thing about all of this that I think is the most important: courtly love. That elaborate system of signals and stages and codes had inside it something that no modern dating app has. In a world where the woman chose practically nothing, where marriage was decided by others, where her entire life was determined by decisions made by the men in her family, courtly love was the only space where she had real power. The man presented himself. The woman decided whether she accepted him, how far the courtship went when it ended. The man could do everything right within the system and still receive a no with no way back. That didn't exist in any other aspect of a medieval woman's life. Today we have 1,000 ways to meet people. Apps, social networks, events, work, mutual friends, algorithms specifically designed to connect people with similar interests. And yet everyone complains that it's harder than ever to genuinely connect with someone. In the Middle Ages, they had none of those tools, and they wrote the most famous love stories in human history: Tristan and Isolde, Lancelot and Guinevere, Romeo and Juliet has medieval roots. The most famous love story of every era is always the same: two people who love each other and can't be together. Because in the Middle Ages, love was more real when it was impossible. I'm not telling you that system was better. It was deeply unfair in many respects, especially for women who lived outside the courts and had access to neither courtly love nor any other system of choice. But it has something to tell you about the difference between having infinite options and knowing what to do with them. This is Sin Rostro. Next week, what happened if you didn't pay your debts in the Middle Ages? There was no civil court, no repossession, something worse. You know what you have to do.